So it's great to have Joe back for a couple of reviews over the Christmas holidays. This week's film is Mauvais Song. Joe, what did you think?
Well, knowing a bit about this filmmaker's work before this, I know Holy Motors and Annette. I knew already that he was a very stylish filmmaker. And that's immediately clear in this film that the film is very interested in arresting imagery and a really original stylistic kind of approach to filmmaking. And that's really engaging from the very beginning. But I thought the risk is, I think, that when a film is overtly stylish, as this film is from second one, the risk is that the film can end up feeling a bit kind of atomized, like a series of isolated set pieces and sequences that are really arresting and original in and of themselves, but which don't perhaps sweep you along in the narrative. And so this film kind of felt like sometimes a series of isolated set pieces, like here is the parachute jump, or here is the fight he has with Juliette Binoche's partner. And those sequences sometimes felt less like they were kind of organically emerging from the plot, like they were intrinsic to the story, and more like they were a series of good ideas the filmmaker had kind of put next to each other. That said, they are really, really good ideas. And the imagery and the energy of this film, I just found spectacular. And so even if the whole doesn't entirely cohere, I found it just brilliantly entertaining. The second half, I thought, was started to flag a little bit, was less sort of propulsive. And that's really interesting because it's the second half that is more plotty. It's almost like the first half of the film, which is not really that concerned or has a very sort of devil-may-care attitude towards plotting and narrative and sort of throws out these ideas willy-nilly. In the second half, it almost feels obligated to kind of tie the narrative up and, you know, take you where the story is taking you. And at that point, it felt sort of bogged down by the story in a way that the first half wasn't. But that's actually really common, you know, in film and literature, that you start off with this amazing energy, and then it's almost like the artist realizes they have to kind of tie it all up and resolve the narrative that they set in motion, and it gets a bit plodding. However, that energy runs through the whole of the film, and it has a youthfulness and a vigor that I just thought was utterly charming. And the fashion, I think, is brilliant. And it's really interesting that obviously the fashion of this period is really making a resurgence. So oftentimes these kids from like mid 80s, they look like the kids from New Cross today, you know. And I have a real fondness and sort of nostalgic, that it has really nostalgic appeal to me, films of this era and period, you know, the 80s and early 90s. And so I really loved the look of it. And it has this fantastic soundtrack, which gives it a sort of a kind of classical grandeur and goes really well with the operatic and theatrical stylings of the film. There are moments where, like his tricks, when have you heard of the apple trick, and he throws the thing up and then it changes and he catches it. Moments like that I found were just like pure Godard. Reminded me of Two or Three Things I Know About Her, I think it is, or Masculine Feminine, where there's one of the films where Anna Karenina, she tosses an egg and then someone knocks on the door or something. She goes to the door and has a conversation, comes back and catches the egg like 5 minutes later. And there is this crazy inventiveness that is just brilliant. And I thought the plot with this, which isn't really developed, this virus and this antigen, whatever it was all about, reminded me very much of Alphaville and that mad kind of sci-fi plot. And then in the middle of it, you've got that just astonishing tracking shot with Bowie when he's running down the road, which was just amazing. I was watching it thinking, wow, this is just pure cinema, you know. Juliette Binoche's character, her relationship with the guy who's like 3 times older than her, leaves me with a kind of a queasy sort of feeling. And I found that to be sort of a pretty serious flaw in the film, like, really? But the shallowness of Binoche and Delpy's character is less problematic, given that all the characters are like entirely superficial and shallow, intentionally so. They're like cardboard cutouts, larger than life, iconic kind of cartoon figures. So I thought the film on the whole was beautifully choreographed. It has amazing energy, and it feels iconic. It's like a film that knows it's iconic. So it's really fresh and bracing and original, and I thought it was just great cinema, and definitely actually the most fun I've had with one of his films, because the other films, Annette and Holy Motors, are films that I've found myself kind of admiring rather than being swept up by. And in this one, although the narrative is sort of badly worked out because he doesn't really care about the narrative, it's finally just the energy of the film that drags you through.
Interesting. I think I've got very similar views to you, but I don't think I quite liked the things that I liked about it. I didn't like quite as much as you. I mean, I must say I have really mixed feelings about Leos Carax, because I've seen the same three films that you have: Holy Motors, Annette, and this one. And I would say in all, maybe not Annette, but certainly in this film, it really is about style over substance. And I think you make that point really well. It's almost unashamedly style over substance. You know, that is what the film is. There's no depth to any of the characters. It looks great. I mean, it made me think, and this is too harsh to say it's like a student film, but it's got something of a student film. You know, it's really creative, it's really experimental and innovative, but it doesn't quite pull it off. You know, there's a real lack of coherency, which, you know, I think other contemporary filmmakers are just as creative, but there's a coherency to the film that works, that isn't present in this film. I mean, I think it kind of combines genres so much. You know, sometimes it's serious, sometimes it's comedy, sometimes it's kind of anarchic and with a 70s kind of punk vibe. Sometimes it's, a lot of the time, I really feel that it's trying to be cool. And I think there's a real lack of coherency, even though in each of those things, it has some success in actually doing it. So I kind of agree with you. But I do think it's, you know, as with many Godard films, I think, you know, it feels extremely pretentious at times. It just feels like the purpose is to make a film that looks good. The purpose of this film is to make a film that looks good and is cool. And, you know, I guess that is what it is. And you either like that or you don't. I like that less, I must say. I found the Bowie sequence, it looks amazing, as you say. I mean, it's at the start, it almost looks like it's violent, it's aggressive. It looks like he's fighting, and then he's dancing, and, you know, and then the speed with which he runs, with the background behind him, and the tracking shot. From a cinematography perspective, it looks amazing. But I just don't know how this fits into the film. You know, it's like a music video sequence. You know, it didn't feel like it fits into the film. I mean, clearly he likes music and movement and kind of dance in his films, and obviously, you know, because Holy Motors has music in it, and Annette is a musical. So, you know, it's an early sign of that, I guess, of him liking to work with music. But looks good, but just didn't fit into the film for me. It's very odd. But despite all that kind of problem I have with the film, I think there are some things in it that I really loved. His use of silences. Sometimes the sound just cuts, and sometimes it cuts for like 2 seconds, and sometimes it cuts for longer. Like there's a longer scene where they're on the motorbike and there's no sound. and then there is sound, and you know, I just find that really effective. Sometimes it cuts for very short periods, like a few seconds where they're speaking. You see the mouth moving, but nothing. You're not hearing anything. Or I really liked the way that these intermittent silences were used. That was really powerful. I like the sound score generally. You know, there were little details, like when, I can't remember which of the girls it is, but one of them's brushing her hair, and you see it from behind, and the sound as it goes through the hair, it's a real visceral thing. You kind of feel it, but the sound is just amazing. When they parachute, some of the sounds are just, they're so subtle but extraordinary. And when she's opening the condom, I mean, there's quite a few scenes which made me think of Bresson, because there's quite a lot of hands early in this film. And one of them is where she's opening the condom, and there's just something about the sounds there. So I really noticed that felt like a lot of attention was given to picking up the subtlety of the sounds. The cinematography, as you say, is amazing. You know, it looks fantastic. You know, it's a collection of shots that are fantastic. And the one thing you didn't mention was the close-ups of the faces, because there's a lot of close shots of faces in this, and you know, they're such interesting faces. I mean, Juliette Binoche is so young in this film. I've seen her in lots of other films, but she's older. She's so young in this film, and I don't know, her face is so interesting. And then obviously the two gangsters, and is it Alex, the you know, Denis Lavant. They've got such interesting craggy faces, and there's just such fascinating close-ups, and I think that was really well done. The lighting and everything was just worked really well on that. I did think there is a problem in this film with the portrayal of women. You kind of made a reference to it, but you know, there's three females in this film. Two of them are very kind of weak females that just follow the, you know, what the guy's doing. They have no agency. The men are in charge in this film. The other one has a lot of power, but she's a caricature. She's like a clown. You know, she's not really got power in the way that the men have in this film. And I did notice that. I mean, it's interesting. I didn't really think about the age difference, but you're right. That kind of fits into that context as well, because it's like there's something that just feels slightly uncomfortable about the women in this film. I would say of the three films that we've both seen of his, this is actually the least interesting. I think it's not his best of the three that I've seen. I really liked Holy Motors, I must say. I think Holy Motors has a coherency. It is a kind of series of almost unrelated, bizarre events, and it looks good, but there is a kind of coherency to it, a really weird coherency, and Holy Motors doesn't have that problem that you mentioned, which I agree with, is that this feels like it needs to develop the story towards the end, whereas Holy Motors almost gets more bizarre as it goes on, and the closing scenes are really weird. So yeah, not his best film, but definitely worth watching.
Well, interesting that we both sort of noticed and were struck by exactly the same things, just felt slightly differently about it. I guess what it comes down to is I have slightly more patience for, and actually love for, that kind of self-consciously cool, pretentious film. You know, it just reminds me of being 20 and reading Camus and writing about Kafka and stuff, you know, and in a very knowing way, you know, and the film just delighted in that, but in a way that I found quite seductive. But yeah, I take all your points, and I agree actually that there's no doubt Holy Motors is a more mature film, isn't it? And really it's by a filmmaker who really understands what he's good at and does that really well.
Yes. Yeah, good. Well, we both think worth watching.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So next time we're both going to review the Norwegian film Grit from 2021, directed by Itonje Soime Guttormsen. So looking forward to that.
Yeah, so it sounds good.